dead. Media proudly presents...
How's it going, cinephiles? Dead Media here, and welcome back to Couch Kernels. Today we'll be discussing a movie that Alan Moore has hated since it was only a script. Who's Alan Moore? He's this guy. In all seriousness though, Alan Moore is responsible for a lot of the important dark comics from the 80s, many of which you've probably heard of through their movie adaptations. Some of these adapted works include From Hell, Batman the Killing Joke, Watchmen, League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, and V for Vendetta. He also notoriously disapproves of any movie adaptations of his work, but you would too if all of your adapted works were adapted, well, wrong.
You're doing it wrong.
While he was still writing comics, from which he recently retired, he actually started writing comics with the express intent that they could never be committed to film. So yeah, he was unhappy. But we aren't here to talk about Alan Moore, we're here to discuss one of the movies I mentioned.
Well, we're waiting.
V for Vendetta. This movie, as I said, is based on a comic book. My copy is signed by the artist. He even did a sketch for me. Now, the comic was written by Alan Moore and illustrated by David Lloyd between March of 1982 and May of 1989.
What took you so long?
This is because it was originally released as a series of black and white strips appearing across 26 issues of a magazine called Warrior, a British anthology comic published by Quality Communications. Warrior was cancelled, however, in 1985, and DC Comics opted to reprint the comics in color in 1988, and allow Alan Moore to complete the story. DC included the series in their Vertigo line of comics, a line meant for more mature readers. DC discontinued the Vertigo line a few years ago, but they didn't stop producing comics for more mature audiences. They created a new line called DC Black Label, under which they re-released many of their popular Vertigo titles, as well as publishing several other stories they were unlikely to do in their main continuity. The very first thing they released under Black Label was actually Batman Damned, whose first issue courted controversy when you could see the shadow of Bruce Wayne's bare penis for a frame, which shot the demand and price of the first printing of the issue through the roof, especially since they opted to remove that part of the image from all subsequent printings. I am way off track. Let's cover our criteria for this one. Today we'll talk about plot and writing, acting, soundtrack, effects, and dialogue.
I don't like change!
First, let's do plot and writing. We kind of have three fairly simple concepts here, but they mesh together to make one functional plot somehow. Some movies can't even manage that with one story. We have a story of a scared woman meeting a man who changes her entire outlook on life, helping her to become fearless. We have a story of a scarred man who is an unwilling former patient in a series of experiments sanctioned by a corrupt government. And finally, we have a story of a vigilante giving the people the courage they need and a symbol to stand behind in an effort to effect change by overthrowing a tyrannical, totalitarian dictator. Now what if I told you the vigilante, the man who changes the woman's life, and the scarred man bent on revenge are all the same man? Now how about we set all these stories in unknown
in the not too distant future
in England after a major virus wiped out around 100,000 British people. Now let's suppose the government is both extremely conservative and religious. Also, the United States have collapsed into a third world country after a major war, and are currently tied up in a civil war. This is a basic idea of what we're looking at with V for Vendetta, and for that intriguing smorgasbord, and the fact that they managed to make a political story that
politics, 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 politics
held my interest, we should probably give them a Colonel. Now for the acting. Natalie Portman stars in this one as Evie Hammond, a woman who works for one of the major news outlets. She's scared of a good many things, but especially government thugs, having lost both her parents years earlier when they were taken away and made to disappear. She does very well here, especially coming less than a year after her performance in Star Wars Episode 3.
Anakin, you're breaking my heart.
I mean, her crying is actually believable here. Opposite her, as our title character of V, is Hugo Weaving. Now, I believe that it speaks volumes to Weaving as an actor that he was able to convey so much emotion in this role, without being able to use his face at all. The character's face is covered at all times by a Guy Fawkes mask. The villain of the piece is Chancellor Adam Sutler, played by John Hurt, who I found to be extremely believable as a Big Brother-style totalitarian dictator, but that said, I don't know that I can think of a single John Hurt performance that wasn't great. We also have several supporting cast members here, including Stephen Fry, who all put in exceptional performances. Everything about the acting here is worthy of a Kernel, so let's give it to them. The soundtrack here is subtle but effective. Everything works how it should. We also have a few named songs here, but both are classical works. When one of the Chancellor's henchmen is in his greenhouse at one point, we hear a piece of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. Lovely. The main character, by the way, seems to have a flair for the dramatic, or in some cases, perhaps the operatic. He destroys a few British landmarks over the course of the story, and each time he does, it involves a fireworks display and Tchaikovsky's immortal 1812 overture. For the power of these pieces, if nothing else, the soundtrack deserves a Kernel. Now, effects. I don't wish to say anything against the effects, but to my eye there just weren't that many instances of any effects to talk about. Obviously, the scenes involving the destruction of landmarks were impressive and believable, but between that and the wholly unnecessary use of bullet time in the final fight scene, likely prompted by the involvement of the Wachowskis whose Matrix trilogy only ended a few years prior, there just isn't much to the effects here, so I don't think we'll award them a Kernel. A lot of the dialogue here is politically charged, but there are plenty of memorable lines. We have a line that's a recitation of a classic poem in Remember, remember the 5th of November, the gunpowder treason plot. I know of no reason why the gunpowder treason should ever be forgot. We have a political statement in People should not be afraid of their government. Governments should be afraid of their people. Also, there's an interesting exchange between Evie and V early on. She asks him, "Who are you?" To which he replies, "Who? Who is but the form following the function of what, and what I am is a man in a mask." And she replies, "Well, I can see that." Then he counters with, "Of course you can. I'm not questioning your powers of observation. I'm merely remarking upon the paradox of asking a masked man who he is." Solid point there. Stephen Fry gets a good one too, stating, "You wear a mask for so long, you forget who you were beneath it." Late in the movie, a detective asks Evie, "Who was he?" And she answers, "He was Edmond Dantes, and he was my father, and my mother, my brother, my friend. He was you, and me. He was all of us." There's also a lengthy line with a whole lot of E words. I'm gonna put it on screen instead of telling it to you. Now, that's 6 quotes. Pretty sure that means it qualifies for a Kernel for dialogue.
Prepare to qualify.
And now, let's tip out our bucket and see what we have. We have 4 Kernels. I really like this movie, even though its accuracy to the comic is dubious at times, with some elements missing entirely. These elements would be a bit tough to explain, so I won't. But I would absolutely recommend both the movie and the comic to you, if what I've said here has piqued your interest at all. Now it's time for Name That Frame. This is a continuation of the round we started in my Scribbler video. There were some very good guesses in the comments on that one too, but if you guys feel like changing your minds, final guesses are due this video, and we will reveal next time. So if you look at my TV, we have our next frame. If you know what it is, please do comment below. And if you have any questions or comments, I'd be happy to answer them below as well. That's it for me, guys, but we'll be back soon with a new video and maybe a new theme soon. Bye now.